Hello, welcome to this video. Thank you so much for tuning in and sharing in this now moment with myself and with one another. This is going to be a weekly Wednesday card reading, and it's going to give a little overview of the energies that I'm feeling into and synchronicities that are coming up from my perspective as to what's happening in the collective. And so we'll just kind of get started. The cards can be very helpful because they allow us to see a little bit more deeply into different perspectives, and they can be used, through symbols, pictures, and descriptions that can sometimes help validate our experience or give us more insight or an aha. And the example I'm using that I find really funny is I'm really not into astrology as much as some of my friends are, and I find it fascinating and equally confusing. Yet I continually have dreams that are astrological in meaning. And whenever I pull these cards, it tends to be right in alignment with what's happening astrologically. So I thought, well, I might as well share this with the collective. And so we'll start off. I pulled 3 cards from 2 sets. One of the sets is called the Sacred Path cards by Jamie Sams. I'll show you the book. That's the workbook. It's a well-used workbook. I actually got it at a used bookstore years ago. And the second set of cards is called the Chakra Zodiac Oracle Deck. I like using these 2 cards because I'm very much in tune with the indigenous peoples and the way in which they teach or taught and continue to teach. It's in part of my bloodline, and I find myself very drawn to shamanism and, of course, earth teachings and connecting with all of the elements and so on and so forth. Also, I like the astrology aspect because then when I pull these cards, it piques my curiosity and I look up the meanings and I get further understanding and awareness of what's happening in our collective alignments, because the astrology affects us individually and it affects us collectively on Earth as we line up with these different places and spaces in the zodiac or in the galaxy, or however we want to look at it. So the 3 cards I pulled when I asked what are some of the energies that are coming up for this week and potentially even the month, even though I'm going to do weekly readings, are smoke signals, what is our intention, and showing compassion, our higher heart chakra. I think that's in, I could just stop with those cards because those are the most important. But this has a lot to do with in conjunction with Capricorn and authority and views and opinions, the talking stick. So the last card is Leo, performer, and returning home. So how does this all tie together? And I found it really funny because out of the, 40 some odd cards that are in the chakra deck, the 2 that I pulled were Leo and Capricorn. And it just so happens we have full moon in Capricorn in a couple of days. So relevant, obviously. And we also have Venus in retrograde in Leo. And for those of you who are familiar with astrology, I encourage you to run with it. I'm only going to go through a brief synopsis of some websites I've found to help explain what that means. But I'm going to give my energetic reading about what I see as the definition of these cards. So the overall picture is show compassion and the higher heart chakra. And I really think it's important to start there. And then we'll get to the full moon in Capricorn. And we're looking at a period of time where a lot of people want to speak. On the flip side, a lot of people aren't speaking because other people are doing it for them. And that has to do with authority. I'll get to that in a minute. The other sign in Leo is our authenticity, our loyalty, and performance, how we are on stage, right? And so if we are not in a place through our higher heart when we are acting on authority or in response to authority, and we are on a performance, but it is not coming with our heart-centered signature, then it causes us to speak and act in ways that are not in alignment with our true home base, our true intention, our true, our truth, we could say, our authenticity. And that's the overall picture. So the higher heart chakra, and for me in this perspective, is, are we speaking from that space? So I'll talk a little bit about the etymology of compassion, because from my perspective, we are a little hung up on the definitions of words. From one perspective, if you're an English major or your specialty is etymology, and words are everything. Words have meaning. Words are the most important foundation, one would say, for an educated and open communication culture. Without them, right, unless we're just all telepathic, which we still would use words through telepathy to express ourselves. But many of the words, if you look up the etymology, the definition or the root comes from Latin. And the Latin language certainly isn't the first or the oldest language. Therefore, many of those words, while some have been rooted from the Latin language, are pre-Latin. Just like BC, there are things that happened before the birth of Christ, although that BC mark helps us to establish a timeline after the birth of Christ, for example. So that doesn't mean that things didn't exist before the birth of Christ. So there's just things to think about when we are looking at our reality. And one of the things is the authority. We're taking people's authority on these subjects and we are adopting them as our own beliefs. Yet much of that is being questioned right now because we're starting to learn more about the intention behind that authority. And that may be a completely different subject, but it's relevant. So if we can run the higher heart through, if we can listen through the higher heart, if we can speak from the higher heart, that allows us to have a clear intention, and it allows us to receive the information and to be interpreted through that channel. So in such a way that we recognize when we should follow an authority or when we shouldn't, when we should be the authority and when we should potentially listen to someone else who might know a little bit more on the subject matter. And that particular person that may know a little bit more on the subject matter, are they getting their information through their heart? Are they clear and sharing that information with a clear intention? We can feel that when we are open and channeling through that higher heart. We can feel it. So we're being invited to listen. We'll talk a little bit about the talking stick, not with just our ears. When in the indigenous people, the talking stick represented and still represents, everybody sits, everybody has a turn to talk, and everybody has a turn to listen. You don't speak unless you have the talking stick. And then once that talking stick is given to someone else, nobody else speaks until they have that talking stick. So what it does is it gives everybody in the group ample opportunity to talk. And it also requires that everybody in the group listen. So the question in this read is, are we listening with our higher heart? Or are we listening hoping to be able to, are we listening so that we can just talk? Or are we really listening? Are we allowing ourselves to feel into the views and point of views and perspectives of others and truly listen, which means when we are truly listening with ears to hear, that can be felt. It is a ripple effect. It can literally be felt. So when we listen and that other person is speaking, what that does for the person that is speaking is it gives them the opportunity to release. It gives them the opportunity to be heard, to be witnessed. And it becomes a participation and a collaboration. It becomes an interaction and not just a taking turns to talk. You also are taking the time to listen. And that is something that many of us have lost or lost touch with. Collectively, we could say as a collective, there's a lot of people who are anxious to get their words out. There are a lot of people that feel like they need to be heard. And sometimes that can be coming from a place of performance. Sometimes it can be coming from a place of not being heard so much that they feel like they have to overshare, they have to overspeak, they have to continuously talk. And it's an art form to be able to really listen. And it actually can sometimes be the simplest thing we do. And other times it can be a lot of work, especially if someone is saying something that we're in resistance to, or that we disagree with, or we don't want to hear. The message in this is not that we necessarily agree with that person. And the other message is, who are we giving authority to hold that talking stick? Are they talking too much? Have they expressed their authority? And why are we giving them that talking stick longer than everybody else? Are their words more valuable than what we have to say? And at times that may be true. They might be an authority on a particular subject that we don't know about. So it would benefit us to listen to what they have to say and to feel into what they are sharing, and be able to express ourselves sometimes after that, so that we have a broader perspective about whatever it might be. On the flip side, is it time for us to step up and use our own authority to speak our truth with our own authenticity? What are we supporting, performing, that maybe is no longer in alignment with our true intentions, or our true home base, our heart, or our true authenticity? So this is kind of what I'm seeing as far as the overall read. Taking our power back, yet being able to see others' views and others' opinions, and hold a space with compassion, and allowing that to all essentially play out in such a way where we're not in resistance constantly to one another. So one of the things it talks about is the higher heart is also associated with the thymus. If we think about the thymus gland, I want to just point out that sometimes we have this out of whack because we're not, the thymus gland is our immune system, right? So it is essentially, if we're disrupting that, we are also, it has to do with our white blood cells. It regulates our, it's also connected to our lungs. So it's something to keep in mind that we might be, if we're not in our hearts regularly and we're not able to express ourselves fully, sometimes that can affect our immune system. We can feel bogged down energetically. And I think this has to do also with that authority in Capricorn, recognizing that sometimes when we're giving our power away to someone else who we think has more important things to say, or someone else that we've kind of developed a belief system around, we're going to start to feel when that's out of balance. It may not be that we're resonating at that same vibration anymore. It may be that we don't need to listen to that person anymore, because what they're talking about, what they're speaking about, their true intentions are not running through their heart. We'll be able to tune into that and recognize that. And I think that's one of the biggest messages that's coming through is go back within, go into meditation, tune in with our body. Are we doing something out of habit? Are we performing because we feel like we need to find our authority and talk because we haven't had the ability to talk before? Where is that really coming from? Maybe it's time to listen to ourselves. Maybe it's time to go within, take the talking stick and just say, we need some quiet time. Let's go within and really reorganize our intention so that we can transmit or send out the smoke signals. That way they can be read clearly. So the words that come through are acceptance. It talks about fear of spirituality can sometimes be a block from us getting into the higher heart. It talks about when to show compassion and when to accept the situation and move on. Interestingly enough, if you look up the etymology of compassion, it talks about its suffering, but I wanted to play with this for a moment. It talks about in this particular book, being compassionate does not mean enabling bad or destructive behavior, and it is not healthy to take on one's suffering. Ironically, we have this concept that we've been taught from authoritative figures, or that we have essentially adopted or adapted as our own belief structures, that compassion has to do with suffering. Because if you read from the origination of the word, it is tied to suffering. But I really want to hone in on that for a moment. And ironically, I just did a video on not necessarily having to suffer just because someone else is. That is an old program and an old paradigm from one perspective. We are human, having a human experience. And from my perspective, having compassion just means that I see you. I recognize that you're in it. I recognize that you're a human having a human experience. And I have compassion for that because I am a human having a human experience. I was having a bad day the other day. I've had sadness. I've had suffering. And everyone on this planet, most likely, has also experienced suffering. So from my perspective, it isn't that I need to dive in and have their experience, that I need to suffer as they have been suffering, but I can have the recognition that is an experience, if that makes sense. It gives me the ability to feel for that person, right? But I don't necessarily have to feel it the same way they are. And to go a little deeper, oftentimes I already have, or I may in the future. So for example, if someone is going through a divorce or they've lost a loved one, maybe you've gone through a divorce, maybe you've lost a loved one. You're not necessarily going to feel what they're feeling. And I've worked with quite a few people who've lost a partner, for example, a spouse. And one of the things they've shared with me, and I will do a video again on this eventually, is they get a lot of people who say, try to compare their experience. Oh, I lost my grandma last week. It was terrible. And one of their pet peeves, and this is over and over and over again, is that the person that's going through the suffering in that moment that lost their partner, they don't care. Not from a place of lack of compassion. They don't care that you just lost your grandma when they're going through the grieving process that they just lost their wife. There is no comparison because the relationship is A, completely different, and B, they don't care. They're suffering. They're in it. So rather than us trying to compare ourselves and to say, I'm suffering too, or I feel what you're feeling, we can't necessarily, we can try, put ourselves in that other person's shoes, nor would we want to. I don't necessarily want to be in a state of suffering as if I've lost my partner because my neighbor has. Got a little bug here. That isn't going to help my neighbor, nor is it going to help me. So there's this fine line between having compassion and empathy and getting pulled into that particular reality. And we're being called to use our own authority in an empathetic way. And we can speak from our higher heart. How can I help? I'm so sorry you're going through this. There's nothing I can say to make it better, but what can I do? Or we might feel that nothing needs to be said. They just might need a hug. We might need to bring them some dinner. I mean, there's a lot of different things we can do to show compassion, or just recognizing, I see you. Let me know if I can help. So there's a lot of different ways of looking at it. And by doing that, we are actually taking the authority over our own lives, and we're also recognizing when to speak and have the talking stick and when not to. And I'm using that as an example. Are we doing something from authenticity, or then are we jumping into that situation because we want to feel needed? We might be telling them about our experience about a loved one that we lost because we want to tell about our experience of a loved one being lost, and it's not really our turn to talk. It might be just time to listen, even if we haven't had the opportunity to share our experience. And then when we recognize that, we'll also recognize when someone is maybe ready to listen to us. So there is this give and take, and there is a balance between that. So that was something to recognize about that. So authority in Capricorn. So we've got the full moon in Capricorn. Really quick, one of the sites I found was called Forever Consciousness, just kind of a pretty site. And it just talks about, it says here, the universe is encouraging us to do the hard things, but promising we will be pleasantly rewarded when we do. It talks about a Capricorn full moon gives us an opportunity to find discipline needed to achieve the goals we're after, create those schedules, tick off items on your to-do list, get back into your meditation cushion. I liked that because the next card said return home. And it also says it can help illuminate what is no longer working in our lives, giving us the opportunity to step up and take responsibility. It can be challenging to confront what is no longer working or supporting us, as it sometimes requires us to take ownership of the situation that has been created. So I love that, because even though maybe we didn't create it, from one perspective we did, but from another perspective we didn't create it, but we can still step up and take responsibility about how we respond to it. It just talks about overcoming obstacles, and oh, I love that. I didn't know it was called the sea goat. It's kind of fun. Embracing the challenge. So it talks about Capricorn being authoritative, and they thrive with responsibility, and talks about making plans. The root chakra is the dominant chakra, and it works with Saturn. Working with Saturn energy is good for this, and the solar plexus, Mars energy. Essentially, it's an earth sign, and it's ruled by Saturn. I found that ironic because, why did I find that ironic? Something else was going on in Saturn. Well, anyways, it doesn't matter. Bottom line is self-discipline, take authority over our lives. Oh, I loved this part. Deliberately create your future by choosing your thoughts carefully. And this leads back into, what is our intention? What are we sending out? What signals are we sending out to the universe? What are we asking for? Right? And so when we focus on those things, we're deliberately choosing our thoughts. So this card says if we can come from our higher heart and through that send out our intention, it's going to give us the ability to know when to speak and when to be heard, and when to let it go and just accept. It's going to give us the ability to step up and be our own authority and not continually give our power away to someone who may no longer be really coming from their highest intention. And that leads us into performer. And we are really then performing or moving through our life with our highest intention, frequency, groundedness, and our truest authenticity. So it talks about Leos like an audience. And again, if you're a Leo or if you're a Capricorn, these are just basics that I'm reading from this chakra zodiac. And that can be a very powerful tool if you like being heard and you like people listening to you. But the question is, are we doing that from our ego? And are we doing it? Are we on a stage? Are we on our authentic stage? Or are we just, I'm hearing the words parrot, self-expression, parroting someone else's story, someone else's propaganda, someone else's point of view from an authoritative stance? Are we just adopting that as our own and then repeating that because it sounds good? That's where, if we truly listen to what we're saying as we say it, we begin to take ownership of our words and we channel that through our higher heart, and we're less likely to say things and want to take them back, or we're less likely to say things because someone else told us to. We start to feel for ourselves, recognize through because sometimes people talk a lot, but with authority, but they're not coming from the true, right, centered, grounded heart intention and authenticity. They might just be repeating what somebody else taught them and they know a lot about that subject. That doesn't mean that is necessarily who should be doing all of the talking. So we're really being called to I love it. Well, lots of things in here. But basically, have you been performing a role for others? Recognize if we're doing this for ourselves or if we're doing it because someone else told us to. Just being honest about it and going into the depth of our feelings. Or recognizing when someone else isn't being authentic and they just want our attention. They want to be the authority. Are we going to give them that? Or are we going to take a step back and say, you know, I think I'm going to take this time to go within, and that's where I'm at. Okay. It talks about pretending things are all good when they're not. So again, if we're speaking our truth and we're channeling it through our higher heart, we're not necessarily going to act like everything's fine when it isn't. We might just take that time to go within. And interestingly enough, if I look up Venus in Leo being retrograde, I don't know if I said that right. Essentially, it talks about our sense of self-worth. It gives us an opportunity to take a step back and reflect on what we believe is truly authentic in our lives. So now may not be the time to just speak things and get out there and be very assertive if we aren't balanced in ourselves, if we aren't speaking through our higher heart, taking the talking stick away from somebody else who might be in a really great place to share their experience. And it might be the perfect time for us to go within and go, wow, I never would have heard that had I have not taken the time to stop and listen. And also this leads to the end card, which was shawl, and go within and listen to the other message was show compassion for ourselves. So here we are, maybe we've been, you know, too authoritative. Maybe we've been all about the ego. Maybe we've been responding because of our insecurities. And now we recognize that. It's okay. We're being called to show not only compassion for each other, but compassion for ourselves. And I really feel called, I might do a video just on compassion, because there is this idea that compassion means we have to suffer. And I disagree with that. So I will do a video on that. So I'm just going briefly over shawl. I mean, it sounds like a pretty boring card, but that represents returning home. Ironically, it says If you are in need of returning home, the shawl may have appeared in your spread today. This could mean that you've lost your way or have lied to yourself about where your heart feels at home. So ironic that we're talking about getting into the higher heart chakra. And it's also ironic because it talks about lying to ourselves. Are we lying to ourselves about what we really believe in? What makes us feel at home? What makes us happy? That's our Leo. Leo card is, are we performing because of what somebody else has told us we need? And it's saying, get back to the heart, get out of denial. It talks about returning to a more natural way of life. Talks about being on a performance, living, getting out of the rat race, rediscovering the home of the heart, embracing and loving the true self, owning the joy of life without denial. That has to do with authority again. And having the courage to rediscover the heart, dropping the masks of the pretender and returning to live in truth. Yes, I just love that. I think it's so beautiful. So I think I'm going to end on that note. The Earth Mother welcomes all of her wandering children to the place of rest and surrounds them with her shawl of protection while they heal. If you have lost your way, the shawl welcomes you home to the self once again. Take courage and follow love back to your home of the heart. So I know this is just, it's so interesting to pull these cards in relationships with our full moon and the Venus, which ironically, Venus is the planet of love. If it's in retrograde, we might be finding ourselves struggling in that place, finding what makes us happy. And this is where we have to come back to meditation, prayer, dance, movement. The simple things in life is really the biggest message that's coming through again and again and again. So in love and light, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope someone found this helpful. Namaste.